Hi everybody, thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Amanda Augustine and I'm the resident career expert for TopResume and its sister sites Top Interview and Top CV. You can request a free review of your resume or your CV at any time by going to topresume.com or by going to topcv.com. I'm so excited because today I want to answer any and all resume questions, but my little tidbit at the beginning where I provide tips and facts and that sort of thing is going to be completely centered around those who have recently experienced a layoff or have an employment gap that they're trying to cover. So I want to specifically talk about some different strategies for how you can address a layoff or an employment gap on your resume, but of course I want to open it up to any and all questions related to writing your resume or finding a job. If you're just joining me, thanks so much. My name's Amanda Augustine and I'm the resident career expert for TopResume, and today we're talking resume tips. Specifically, how do you address a layoff or an employment gap on your resume? And then of course I am happy to answer any and all questions related to either resume writing or your job search. Before we get started, as I always do, I like to remind everyone who's watching that if you haven't entered already, I highly suggest submitting your resume for our free resume makeover contest. Every week for a 6 week period, we are selecting a new winner to receive a full resume makeover by one of our resume writers. We are on week number 4, so this Friday we will be picking winner number 4. So as long as you get your entry in before the end of this week, you're golden. If you've already entered, you are still in the running. We are still pulling names from the same pool, so you only need to enter once. In order to enter to win a free resume makeover courtesy of TopResume, simply go to topresume.com /resume-makeover. And my lovely, always fantastically helpful colleague Jenna has already included the link in the comments below. So as you know, I like to give a little bit of an upfront set of tips, and then I open it up to Q&A. If you have a question and you don't want to forget it, feel free to enter your question as a comment below. Post it and I will make sure to get to it. I'm actually aiming to talk less in the beginning. I'm really aiming to do maybe about 20-25 minutes of tips and then go straight into Q&A, because the last couple weeks we've had a lot of questions, especially at the end, and I want to make sure that we get to all of them. So without further ado, let's get started. Today it's all about resume writing. Specifically, how do you address a layoff or an employment gap on your resume? And I know there's a lot of different circumstances where you would have a gap or currently be or have experienced a layoff. Obviously, right now, if you have been recently laid off, you are in very good company. With the unprecedented unemployment numbers, there are so many people who are in the same boat. In fact, I truly think that employers and hiring managers are going to be focused a lot less on what happened with your layoff. If they see you're unemployed right now, I think they're just going to make an assumption and they're not going to look too much into it. That said, I know that everybody wants to know, well, what could I be doing on my resume to best position me to get that next job? And as always, you'll see me kind of dart to the side because I made sure I wrote down some notes to make sure that I provided as many resources as possible, as well as making sure I cover all the tips that I would typically give in one of these situations. First of all, my first tip is resist the temptation to explain your employment gap or your layoff directly on your resume or your cover letter. You do not need to waste precious resume space explaining the circumstance of your layoff. The beauty about your resume is that it's a marketing document, and its goal is to best position you for your next career move, highlighting your qualifications, your skills, your experience, your education, anything that paints your career story in the best light. You don't have to waste space explaining that you were part of a layoff. It's actually unnecessary. If they ask about it in the resume process or during the interview, of course you're going to answer honestly, but you don't need to bring it up if they don't bring it up. And as I mentioned before, I don't think people are going to be looking into too much for anybody who has, an employment end date in the last few months, even in the next few months, because I think it's going to take a while, of course, for the economy to recover. It's going to take quite some time. So save the space on your resume where you would have explained your layoff to really highlight your qualifications. That is by far the most important thing. Whenever someone asks me, well, how can I write a resume that impresses a recruiter or a hiring manager? It's always going to come back to, are you painting the picture of your history and clearly explaining why you're qualified and interested in the role that you're applying for? They want to see a direct correlation between your resume and the job they're trying to fill. And so that's the goal, is, to make it as easy as humanly possible to understand why you are qualified to perform such a role, and perhaps why you may have even been led down a road to directly want to work for this type of company or in this specific industry or something along those lines. I said this before and I'll say it again because I think it's so important. Remember that your resume is a marketing document and not a transcript. This is not like when you were applying to go to university or college where you had to list every single detail. The beauty of your resume is that while you cannot lie, you should not lie, you do get to decide what information you're going to highlight, what you're going to downplay, what you're going to omit entirely, and what parts you may elaborate further on because it's in your best interest and most relevant to the role that you're applying for. So keep that in mind. You do have the flexibility, the power, the decision to decide what information you want to include and what you don't want to include. And that also includes specific roles. You do not have to list every job you've ever worked at on your resume. Now, say you're going for a security clearance or there's an application form and they very specifically said, list every single job you've ever held. Okay, you have to do that. But that's an application that they're asking you to fill out. Your resume itself does not need to follow suit. So just be careful. Make sure that you decide what you want to show and what you don't want to show. I get asked this a lot. Can I just remove jobs left and right from my resume? Yes, but you don't want to create employment gaps. The more employment gaps, the more questions employers will have about your work history. And so be careful about that. Say you held multiple jobs around the same period of time and some of them were short-lived. Sure, remove the ones that have nothing to do with your goal. You don't need to include them. If you're, once you've graduated college, any references to high school stuff, anything where you held a job while you were in high school, it could even, that stuff can be removed. Once you've been in the workforce for a few years, feel free to completely get rid of, internships if they're no longer relevant. That's the beauty. You get to decide how much you're going to show. And if you have a very long history, I've said this many times, you want to truncate it and really focus on the last 15 years, elaborating most on the relevant roles that were most recent in your past experience. So in those last few years, what have you done in particular that's relevant to what you're trying to do today? And I know there are some people who are going to tell me, yes, but my relevant work was much farther back in my history. We can completely address that if that's something anyone wants to talk about. I'm happy to go down that road as well during Q&A, so just let me know. Hey, Numan, I see your question about mission statement. We call it a personal statement on a CV. We call it a professional summary on a resume, and I will get into that. If I don't address it in my first question for Q&A, someone please remind me, but I'm happy to go into that. If you're just joining me, my name's Amanda Augustine. I'm the resident career expert for TopResume, as well as our sister sites, Top Interview and Top CV. And today we're talking about writing resumes. Particularly, I'm providing some tips on how to address a layoff or an employment gap on your resume, and then I'm going to transition into Q&A to answer any and all resume, CV, and job search questions. Okay, so we talked about the fact that you don't necessarily have to include every job you've ever held, but I have been getting a lot of questions about, I had a very short-lived job. I started in January and I was out by April thanks to COVID. Do I add it? Normally I'd say, hey, you get to decide what you want to add, what you don't want to add. In this case, I would say add that role, even if it was short-lived, because otherwise your most recent experience falls in the previous year, and that makes the perceived employment gap look much larger, and you want to avoid that. And so my next tip when it comes to addressing layoffs on your resume is that you can remove the months associated with your dates of employment. You do not have to put start month and years, end month and year. You can just go with years. And that might be the simplest solution if you had a very short-lived job that then got cut due to COVID. So just put 2020 down as the employment. That's the only thing you have to put. You don't have to put a start or an end year, just put 2020. That actually makes it a lot easier. When people glance at your resume, it's not this big red flag. They kind of get where you're going with it. So don't be afraid to do that. That said, if you decide to go that route and alter the start and end dates on your resume for your most recent role to only include years, you have to follow suit on all your other positions. Anywhere else where you're adding in a date, you then want to just stick to years as well, because you want consistency. There's a couple reasons for that. When someone's reviewing it, it just looks more polished, it looks cleaner, it looks more professional if you are consistent in how you format your dates, the company names, the job titles, etc. and so forth. The more consistent you are, just the cleaner, the more professional it automatically looks. The second reason why you want to be consistent with those dates is because the applicant tracking system, that horrid recruiting software that everyone complains to me about, that is, parsing the data on your resume and then, kind of determining if you're going to pass through to be viewed by a human being or if you're going to sit in purgatory. That system tends to favor a clear hierarchy of information. What does that mean? Is that it's very clear what your subheads are for each of your sections. It's very clear that when you do this and you capitalize it and it's all in bold, we know that's a company name, that when you're going to list dates, the dates are all listed the same way. It makes it easier for those systems to be able to correctly parse your information. So if you are addressing a layoff on your resume and you decide, yes, it does make the most sense to eliminate months associated with tenure, or your unemployment or your employment start and end dates, then you have to do it with all the rest of the positions that fall on your resume. Does that make sense? It's pretty simple. I know a lot of people just aren't aware that they're allowed to do that. 100%. Again, it's a marketing document. It's not a transcript of your entire work history. So it's okay to just include the years. Trying to think of what else people had asked me about that I wanted to make sure I addressed that specifically came to this. We talked about removing the dates. We talked about you get to highlight and omit or elaborate on the different things based on what you want. The other thing is, how do you, basically fill that gap? And of course, if it's an employment gap that was pre-COVID, all of this applies. If it's been more recent because you were recently laid off, still all this advice really applies in how you're going to structure your resume. In truth, I really think the question that most employers care about is less about the circumstances of your layoff and a lot more about what have you been doing since that layoff occurred. And so what I would ask all of you to do is take a step back and ask yourself, well, what have I done, or what could I start doing today, tomorrow, tonight, that would help fill that gap on my resume and demonstrate to employers that I'm still invested in my career, that I'm still sharpening my skills, that I'm still keeping a pulse on my particular industry while I'm searching for that next career move. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about that. For one, contract work. Depending on what you've been doing, there may be an opportunity to get some part-time, short-lived, consulting gigs, contract work, even if it's temporary. Obviously, it's better if it leverages the skill set you want to use, in your next full-time permanent position. But if you need something to pay the bills, you do what you have to do. So whether it's a side hustle, And I know we have some great articles on that in terms of what are all the different options. I just wrote one actually for a British publication that's coming out, I think tomorrow, on different side gigs that you could be doing from the comfort of your home. And I mean, they really run the gamut. There's places like Upwork and sites of that type that are specifically for those folks who are freelancers. Freelancing is obviously a great way to leverage your skill set while you're hunting for that long-term goal. Get creative. I was talking to a journalist this morning and we were talking about, well, what could some of those jobs look like? Well, if you were an English major, regardless, maybe you're in marketing, maybe you're a journalist, whatever it is, but you're good at writing, you could offer up your services either pro bono for friends and family's businesses, to maybe if you're a part of like a nonprofit or a cause that you really love, you could offer up your services to. I even did that when I was laid off. I was part of a National Association of Professional Women. It's since changed its name, but that's what that association was called when I was a part of it. And I went right up to our chapter president and said, hey, I'm here to help. Can I take over who's running social media for our chapter? I'd be happy to take that on. Let me know what I can do. I'm happy to run a workshop for all of our members on leveraging social media to boost their personal brands. What can I do for you? And it was a great way for me to feel useful, for me to structure my day better, to give back to a cause or an association that I cared about and believed in, as well as to pad my resume, frankly, so that it showed that I was doing something during this time of unemployment other than simply washing my hands and trying not to go stir crazy at home. We talked about, doing contract work or freelance work to fill that gap. Something to note, you do not have to receive a paycheck for the work that you're doing in order to put it on your resume or CV. So if you're volunteering your time or your skill set, you can put that on, and that can be the most recent thing, even if it's just a short-lived exercise to keep you, on track, and also making that perceived employment gap look smaller on your resume. And I talked a little bit about volunteering your time. There's a couple different ways, obviously, that you can volunteer your time right now, in addition to searching for a job. You could be doing something that's very COVID specific, and I think everyone's gonna, anyone who sees that on a resume or your LinkedIn profile is gonna admire you and respect you for donating your time to helping, with this crisis, dealing with this crisis. That said, there's also other ways that you can volunteer your time. I'm a very big proponent of what's known as skills-based volunteering, SBV for short. And the concept behind that is frankly that there are a number of sites. I actually made sure I wrote them down this time so I could tell you more than just the one that I always remember. There's Catch-a-Fire, Volunteer Match, All for Good, and the 4 is spelled out, FOR, Create the Good, and Hands-on Network. All of these are amazing resources where you can go there and say, I have this expertise, I have this skill set, and they will match you with nonprofit organizations and charities that are seeking that type of expertise to help them, but they do not have the means to pay your average consultant in order to do it. So that might be a really great way to help you, fill that gap. Feel good about yourself. If you're even trying to further develop a skill and it's not something you got to do in your most recent job, this could be your opportunity to flex that muscle again or to build upon that skill set. And also, do so in a way that's frankly also going to help with your resume. I always say, remember that, networking is so important in any job search. I think it's even more important now given what's going on in our job market. We know that you're 10 times more likely to land a job when your application is accompanied by, a referral. You don't get those referrals unless you are investing in nurturing your network. Just keep in mind that is not just your professional connections. That is your friends. It's your family. It's the parents of your friends and the spouses of your friends and all those things. It's the stuff you do outside of work that you love and the people you're meeting when you're doing those things. So don't discount those connections. You may have some really amazing social butterflies within those groups of friends that will be able to connect you with someone that's not already in your existing network. So definitely keep that in mind. That's always so helpful when you're trying to look for a new job, whether you're trying to make some dramatic change or you're just trying to get a similar job to what you most recently held. Okay, we talked about volunteer work and skill-based volunteer opportunities. We spoke about freelance work, contract work, side hustles, something you can do while you're sitting in home in isolation, but you can still make some money. Again, showing that you're doing something is always better than nothing, even if it's not perfectly relevant to your job goals. Everyone knows that things are a little nuts right now. So I think everyone's getting a little bit of a pass, a little bit more so than they would have when the economy was healthy and thriving. Put it that way. Last but not least, of course, there's investing in your professional development. And there are various different ways that you can demonstrate that you are investing in your professional development, in your career, and in your skill set while you're looking for that next job. And you can definitely do both simultaneously. So for instance, there are so many courses online that are currently available. A lot of a lot of universities are offering some of their online courses for free. There are so many resources out there, and I'm so sorry, Jenna, I did not think to pull this article for you ahead of time, but we definitely have a really great article that's all these different online courses you can take right now, and all these different sites that are providing access to these courses. Most are free, some are at a cost, so you can weigh the pros and cons. Anything that actually leads to a specific certification or what's known as a micro-credential, those you typically have to pay for. And I don't think anyone's surprised by that. But, this might just be the chance to get that extra, set of initials after your name that you've been putting off forever, if it will help you get ahead in your chosen career. I wouldn't just do it for the sake of doing it. I would definitely make sure it's something that's relevant to your career, but you can show that you are digging deeper, learning more, and staying on, keeping a pulse on what's on trend in your industry. These are great ways to do so. So definitely consider the e-learning opportunities that are available today. Even check your local college or university. There's a lot of places offering courses right now. Even I've noticed the public libraries are offering different courses. So see what makes the most sense and sign up if it's relevant. And then you can add that to your resume. And that typically goes in your education and professional development section. You might make a note of it if in your professional summary, if it makes sense. It's really going to depend on the situation. If it's a credential, the initialism for that credential, the abbreviation would go at the end of your name at the top of your resume, and you may also briefly mention it in your professional summary to ensure that they don't skip over it or it gets overlooked by the reader, since most education and professional development stuff falls to the bottom of the resume, or the end of the resume is a more appropriate description. Last, we talked about e-courses. I'm just looking down because I know I put other things. Attending virtual conferences, trade shows, and networking events. You can 100% still network while you are at home. You can, obviously one-on-one by setting up phone calls, video calls, things of that nature, but there are a lot of opportunities available to also allow you to attend workshops, conferences, trade shows, all virtually. My favorite site, and I have no affiliation with them, I just really like their site and like to promote it. It's called 10times.com. There is a particular section on their site that's dedicated to virtual events, and basically they are an aggregator that shows you every single event that's available around the globe, based on industry and field, as well as location, but obviously we're dealing with the virtual ones. That's a great opportunity because a lot of those allow you to network even virtually, as well as attend workshops and things of that nature that you could then incorporate into the professional development center section of your resume. If it doesn't quite make sense to add it, attending an event is a little different than, say, completing a course or, earning a certification. At the very least, it's information that you could be pumping into your LinkedIn profile, either in status updates. It's something that you could certainly mention in your cover letter as to how you've been staying in touch with what's going on or what you recently learned at this conference, and it makes you so excited to, apply this new knowledge, to this great job you found, as well as it could come up while you're interviewing. So definitely keep that in mind. I also think, I just saw something pop up about LinkedIn's now. I don't know if they're highlighting events or if they're creating events, but I saw something about them doing something in the event space as well. So, dig around on their site a little bit. I'm sure you'll find details about that as well. Okay, I'm looking at the time. We're about a half an hour in, which is exactly where I wanted to be. I'm gonna really quickly recap for anyone who has joined us recently. Again, my name is Amanda Augustine, and I'm a certified professional career coach and resume writer, and the resident career expert for TopResume, as well as our sister sites, Top Interview and Top CV. And today I'm talking about resume tips, particularly how to address an employment gap or a recent layoff on your resume. High level, resist the temptation to explain what happened on your resume, in your cover letter, on LinkedIn, as part of your profile. Unless somebody directly asks you about it, you don't need to go into those details. Use that space to talk up your qualifications and less about explaining what happened. Again, given this economy, I don't think people are as focused on that information anyway. So focus on what matters most, your candidacy. Remember that your resume is a marketing document and not a transcript. So you get to decide which jobs you share, what details you share, and which ones you're going to highlight or elaborate further on, and which ones you will downplay or omit entirely. The one rule here, though, is you don't want to create a bunch of conspicuous employment gaps throughout your resume because you've decided to pull jobs and only pull in what was the most relevant. You want to show that you have a pretty steady employment track, assuming that you do. So don't pull out jobs for the sake of completely tailoring everything for your goal. You just may not, save a lot of resume space for that one role if it's not as relevant, but you do want to at least show that you were employed. If you lost your job recently, I would still include it on your resume. A lot of people have asked me that. If the job is short-lived, should I include it? 100% include it. If it was even January to April of this year, just put 2020 down as the year. That's it. And that's the next tip. Omit the months. You do not need to include the months for your start and end dates of employment. If you do it for your most recent role, you need to do it for all of your jobs so that you remain consistent in your formatting, both for the viewer as well as for the technology that will more often than not be parsing the information on your resume. And then fill the gap. You're trying to do what you can to fill that gap and more answer the question in the recruiter employer's mind, what have they been doing since they lost their job? In addition to either homeschooling their children or becoming, a home-based nursery or daycare, as some of us have had to do, or washing our hands a million times a day, what have you been doing other than those things and looking for a job? So it's more of like, prove to me that you've been keeping your skill set sharp. Just show me one thing you've been doing at least that contributes to that. And if you haven't been doing anything, guess what? It's okay, because you can start today. And you know why? Because the start date will be 2020, and it will not show the month. So nobody needs to know you started it in May. It could have started, the moment you were laid off. So keep that in mind. If you were involved in old affiliations in the past, maybe now's the time to reach back out to those folks and volunteer your services. So many different ways to fill the gap. I talked about a bunch of them. Volunteering, skills-based volunteering, freelance work, contract work, side hustles, professional development courses, industry, workshops, trade shows, all those things that can be done virtually, all great ways to fill that gap. Without further ado, I want to jump into some of these questions. So I'm going to scroll back up and see what we've been going on. Okay, so Newman was asking, guide me about the mission statement. And a mission statement, some people would also call it the objective statement, and I'm gonna say, call it a personal summary or personal statement, call it your professional summary, that's what we call it in the US. A few things to keep in mind. It's typically 3 to 5 lines long. It's often in the form of a paragraph, but it could be presented as a set of bullet points as well. So you have the flexibility. You could do it either way depending on how you want to frame your professional summary. Your professional summary should be all about pitching your qualifications to an employer. It's the shorthand. It's the quick cheat sheet that's going to set the stage for the rest of your document. Basically sets the tone and gets them geared up for what they're going to review further down on the page. Think of it as the elevator pitch. It really is the elevator pitch. It's less about what you want to do and you're hoping to find an opportunity where you can grow and leverage your skills in order to provide value to an organization. Everything I just said is fluff. It's vague. It doesn't tell me what skills you possess, what type of company you're looking for, and why that type of company should be interested in you. So really think about it as, how can I very succinctly summarize why I'm qualified to do the job that I'm pursuing today. And that's the information that gets included in there. It's gonna have adjectives. It's gonna have some of those fluffier adjectives. I don't know how you can write one without adding a few of those in there. Just try and use the ones that you're seeing in the job descriptions that interest you, because whenever you can reiterate the information you're seeing on the job descriptions, the easier it is for both the computer as well as a human being to see, oh look, they do have what I'm looking for. Look, they say they have this, they have it, great. So keep in mind that's really what the objective, I'm sorry, not objective statement, I hate that term. That's what the professional summary is really about. Again, 3 to 5 lines, succinct. It's all about demonstrating that you possess the skills that they have. So think of it as that short-lived summary that's going to set the tone for the rest of the document. We have a number of articles on this. I don't know, Jenna, if you can pull the one that I wrote on, ditching your objective statement for a professional summary. That one really explains the nuances and the differences between the two. And I believe it actually provides sample professional summaries that you can look at. So great question. Larry, love this. Is it okay to have a two-page resume? 100% yes. And anyone who tells you differently, I am happy to go toe-to-toe with them. There are certain circumstances where a longer document is actually required or expected. If you are applying for a job in the US federal government, they have a very standard format you need to follow. We actually have a landing page specifically for that type of resume because it's a different type of resume to write. Theirs are typically more than 3 pages long. If you're in academia, the sciences, those resumes, known as an academic resume or an academic CV, tend to be longer because they often have so much space dedicated to listing publications, presentations, books, that sort of stuff. So again, that takes a different format as well. However, most professionals, in white collar professions, or I hate that term, so please excuse me, I don't know a better option for it, but those with in professional jobs typically have a 2-page resume, whether they have 6 years of experience or 16 years of experience. And in fact, there was a really great study done maybe about a year or so ago by a company called Resume Go, where they had recruiters reviewing all these different resumes, and they came back and said that recruiters preferred the 2-page resume over a 1-page. I believe it was 3.2 times. They preferred it 3.2 times, maybe 2.3. The moral of the story is they preferred a 2-page resume, not a 1-page. Why? There are certain things that we've learned through our own research at TopResume as to what recruiters like about resumes, and it's really kind of the core differences between a professionally written resume and a DIY resume. One is presenting a compelling career narrative, and that is really has to do with crafting the professional summary, including the professional title, the areas of expertise, perhaps some highlighted achievements, that whole section that kind of sets the stage and really explains what we're going to see in the rest of the resume. You're going to talk about how you have sales leadership, and then you're going to prove that you have that sales leadership in the rest of your, in your work experience. So creating that, what we call a compelling career narrative, creating the story. In marketing, the buzzword for years has been storytelling. How do you tell a story? And wouldn't you know, it has infiltrated the job search and resume writing business as well. Recruiters want some explanation. They don't just want to see all your jobs. They want you to help connect the dots as to how this experience relates back to whatever you're applying for. So that's one reason why it's a little longer, because that takes space. That takes at least the top third of the first page, if not a little bit more. So of course you're going to need more than a second page. Other factors to keep in mind: if you have a very long career history, employers really only care about the details for the most recent 15 years. So that right away makes it easier to fit in that 2-page limit. Now, what I found was interesting about the study is that they preferred the 2-page over a 1-page. And what I gathered from that, because whenever I was advising entry-level professionals, those who had just graduated or maybe had a year or two of experience under the belt, I was always 1 page. You get a page. You get nothing else. Let's make it work kind of thing, because that was the old rule. That is what most professional resume writers were taught as part of their certification process, and that's the feedback that I've received from employers. Things are changing. Now, if you are entry level, you could have a 2-page resume. You don't have to somehow make it to 2 pages, and actually if you try and force it, it's probably going to not be a very good document because you're adding fluff to make it work. This is not write your essay in Courier New double space size 14 font in order to hit a page limit. So don't try and make it 2 pages if you truly don't have enough information to warrant a second page. But now you don't have to feel compelled to keep it to only 1 page if, say, you did some really great co-ops, or you were really heavily involved in volunteer work while you were in school, or you held side jobs that are relevant to the work you were doing, or you had internships. If you have all those types of skills and experiences, you now have a bit more space to elaborate on them than you did a few years back. So really great question. Yes, 2 pages. I don't know if I put this on, I know I didn't put this on the list for you, Jenna, but if you can find the article that says how long should your resume be, the one that I wrote that's like super long, and I think it has a video in it, that one goes into all the rules as to when to use a 2-page resume, when to use a different size, and if you're trying to get your resume down to 2 pages, what are some of the things you can do in order to make that happen? So really great question, Larry. I hope that helps. I work for a religious institution, but I'm looking for a non-religious job. Do I mention that I worked for a church? I mean, I definitely put that religious institution's name in. You can't really get around that. Whenever you're looking to kind of move into, say, a different industry, in your career search, my big rule is you're trying to find the bridge. What about the work you were doing can you bring into your next role in particular? So I'm trying to think. So for instance, if you don't want to work for a religious institution, you might want to stick more though in that institution space. So are you going to perhaps a nonprofit? Are you going, some other type of institute that has nothing to do with religious orders? That might be an easier transition than suddenly saying, I'm going to go to a startup. Unless you're going to a startup that's somehow trying to everyone can listen to masses live on their phone, or, some sort of app that then has a religious tie to it. So if you're trying to get out of religion altogether, I would really, look back. Last Tuesday, my Q&A was all about changing jobs, all about changing career paths, either industries or more drastic changes. That would be a very good resource for you because I went into the nitty-gritty of everything you can do to help prepare you for that type of move and present yourself in the best light possible. I highly recommend that. Ooh, Kendall, what an awesome question. Are there punctuation, capitalization, etc. rules that help or hurt passing through the ATS other than obvious, like spelling? That is such a great question, and I don't think anyone has ever asked me that, so thank you. To my knowledge, there aren't any issues with punctuation or capitalization because I don't think it's really reading that. I mean, frankly, I don't think it even reads the spaces between, but don't hold me to that. So that's not as much of a concern. I would be concerned What I would recommend doing is that if a word could be hyphenated or not hyphenated, I would try and put both variations in your resume, or when you're about to apply for a position, see how they spell it on their job listing, and then mimic that on your resume, because that's more about making sure you'll match up, because chances are if that's how they're listing it in their job description, that's what the system is looking for, and that's the version that will represent or that will resonate with that system. So definitely keep that in mind. In terms of some formatting things, oftentimes for your core skills section or areas of expertise section, which normally comes right after your professional summary before you start going into your work history, assuming you didn't just recently graduate and then, you know, the sections kind of move around a little bit. If you can either list those with bullet points and put them in columns, or you can put them in straight lines and then put some sort of punctuation between them. You know, you can put in like the dot symbol, you can put the up and down line, which is typically above the enter button on your keyboard. You can do that to space them out. What I would recommend is choosing something that's not a custom symbol. Do something that's very common, standard across systems. That will help you. Avoid having, for those of you in marketing who deal with websites where we talk about like a left rail and a right rail, and then the main section of the site, you don't want a right rail on your resume. So if your resume is broken down and it has a major column on the left where you're putting different sections and then you have the main resume, that's actually fine. ATS systems can understand that. If it's the opposite, where the bulk of your information is in this main section and then you have a right-hand column where you're adding stuff, that for whatever reason does not parse well. I wish I could get into the why behind that, but I'm not that technical. I just know that that's what I've been taught, and that's something that I learned only recently that I was really surprised about and interested in. The other things is, you know, I've seen people use ampersands and that doesn't seem to be an issue, but you may want to test, you know, using ampersands for in your core competency section versus spelling out the word and, or in your subheads, you know, like the headings for each section of your resume, such as education, work history, that sort of thing. If you were going to put education and professional development, you might test using an ampersand versus the word and in there to see if that makes any difference. To my knowledge, it doesn't, but it's something to consider. The last thing I'd say is definitely check out 2 weeks ago. I did a live chat specifically on beating the ATS, where I went through every single tip in nitty-gritty detail. And you know, that comment history will also have all the articles that I recommend looking at that are very specific to beating the ATS. So keep that in mind. I'm trying to think if there's anything else off the top of my head that you really need to know that's specific to your question. Anything about grammar rules or punctuation? You don't need to put periods at the end of your bullet points. I was really obsessed with doing that for a while, but it's been pointed out to me, pun intended, that bullet points are not full sentences, and so they do not require a period. It doesn't matter if you do it or you don't, just be consistent. And again, applicant tracking systems love consistency because it helps it, you know, identify the different pieces of information and parse it correctly. So when in doubt, just be super consistent about what you're doing. Should your resume list professional association memberships? 100% it can. It does not need to, but it can if you have the space. I'd add it to the bottom. I always think it's a good resume booster, so 100% if you're active, and especially if you hold any type of leadership position, if you're the head of a subcommittee or if you're the treasurer, whatever it is, that most certainly belongs on your resume. It typically belongs at the end of your resume in the education and additional information or education and professional development section. It can be called education and membership it can be called a few different things, but the moral of the story is it's definitely a nice boost. It should not get the headline on your resume, so put it towards the end. But yes, 100% add that, because you know, what if the hiring manager or the recruiter is also a part of that group? You already have you already have something in common, so 100% list it. Free resources regarding management sciences. I don't know every resource in and out. I believe TopResume, my colleague Jenna may have shared the article that shows all the different places where you can find online courses. Almost all of them cover the gamut, but there is Skillshare, there is LinkedIn Learning, there is edX, Coursera. There's so many more, and I know, but those are the only ones I can think of off the top of my head. Oh, Kimberly, I see your thing. I will make sure that somebody reaches out to you because you should be able to, you can opt in for a phone call with your writer 100%. So I'll make sure that when we get off this, I'll circle back with my colleagues and make sure somebody has reached out to you if they haven't already. All right, my resume was redone. I haven't gotten a single call. What the heck is going on? There's a few different things there, of course. So many different things there. I'm so sorry. You obviously want to be getting hits. I know that I'm sure someone will reach out to you because, at least at our company, we're willing to tweak your resume if it's not working for you. But I also have a really great article, and I'm not going to force Jenna to find it, Nicoletta. I'll go because I know I wrote it and I'll be able to find it more easily. But there's a really great article I wrote that was specifically for those who are either waiting for the resume to be completed by a professional writer, or it's done and now they're saying, okay, now what? What do I do with this sucker to set myself up for success? I wrote kind of like a step-by-step plan on what you can do. It's think of it as like your game plan now that you have this resume, because the resume is a really important part, but there's some other things there as well, and at least I can help you with those pieces to make sure that you're doing everything you need to be doing in order to get the best possible outcome. But I'll also make sure that someone addresses that with you. Okay, Barbara, I'm 60. Is it best to downplay 30 years of experience and make it more like 15 to 20 years of experience? Really great question. A lot of people say this. So yes, the rule of thumb is that you're only really going to elaborate on the most recent 10 to 15 years of experience. And this will actually also address your question, Kendall, that's right underneath that, which is how do you address important work that is more than 15 years ago? Two things. Check out the article. Oh, that's actually directly below your comment, Kendall, that TopResume added in there on how long your resume should be, because I actually provide different options for what you can do with anything beyond that 15-year window in order to still include it without it taking up a ton of space on your resume. So yes, you're trying to downplay, Barbara. I have an article, it's called How to Age-Proof Your Resume. I wrote a version of it for AARP and then expanded upon it further and published it on TopResume as well. And it's really about, one of those tips is obviously focus on your more recent work. You may have done something that's amazing 25 years ago, but they really care about, well, what have you done recently that demonstrate that you still possess that skill set and that you're still keeping up with the industry, yada, 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 for the job that they're filling today. So, be proud of your experience. I'm not saying lie, and I'm not saying you should be ashamed of, having such a great track record. However, you just want to focus on elaborating on the most recent work. You're not going to state, 30 plus years of experience in the blah blah field. You may say, extensive experience. You just won't give a number. That's all. Just stay away from that. So if you received a certification, a degree, or anything like that, that's outside of like that 15-year window, you're still going to include it. You want them to see those credentials. You're just not going to include the years. Let them focus on the most important thing, which is that you possess this credential, and let them guess what the year is. Instead, focus on the more important stuff. When it comes to that, the experience that's beyond that 15-year window, there's typically two different ways that you can represent it on your resume. And again, you can pick and choose what you want to include because it's a resume and not your transcript. You can either include a career note that will say previous early experience includes roles in such as X, Y, and Z, A, B, C, at organizations, including name drop, where I accomplished, not I, you never say that, but, where, insert great accomplishment that you want to put out there. And Kendall, that's really what I'm saying for you, is how to address important work. If there's something that's really compelling that you truly want to add, I have seen, if it's just one position, them, a writer actually elaborating on that information but not including a date. I'd only do that if it's for one position. More often than not, I'd either include a career note, which is a short blurb that would give you an opportunity to name drop clients, company names, titles, anything that's name drop worthy that you want to make sure gets some sort of presence on your resume without taking up a lot of space. The other way to do that is to have a subsection within experience that's called earlier professional history or earlier work history, whatever you used before, just put earlier in front of it. And then you would put company name, job title, and location. And you just list those, starting with the most recent and working backwards. You can skip the really, really junior stuff, but if you just want to demonstrate that you had this career trajectory and this is how you got to, no, my first job was not the channel sales director. Surprise. You want to show a little bit more of the background of how you got to that first position that you elaborate on. That's a way to do so. Oh, this is a great question. How should your resume differ from a LinkedIn profile? This is a great question. And I do want to do one of these talks just on LinkedIn profiles. Next week, I'm going to focus on recent college grads. Anyone who's graduated in 2019 or is graduating in 2020, I'm going to dedicate one to them. But then after that, I'd love to do some others. I like to throw in the resume ones a lot. But I think a LinkedIn profile one would be a really good idea as well. So think of your LinkedIn profile is on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is a social media network, so it's a bit more social by nature. Your resume, while it is a marketing document, it still is kind of cut and dried in terms of its format. There's only so many ways you can really get super creative with it, because recruiters are kind of programmed at this point to look for information in certain spots, and when you start messing with that, they're less likely to really take the time to read it and just pass on to the next. So keep that in mind. Your LinkedIn profile can give a little bit more of that 360-degree view of you as a professional and a human being. It's a great way to give a little bit more insight into your personality, and the things that you're doing that frankly you just can't put on a resume because it doesn't make sense. So it's a really great opportunity for the professional summary in particular, the summary section of a LinkedIn profile. You may have your summary from your resume at the bottom of that section, but I often like to put a little section, a little blurb, a few lines above that are in the first person that talk about, hi, how did I get into what I'm doing and why do I love it? Something that gives a little bit more into this is who I am, this is what I thrive on, this is what I enjoy, I love the challenge of X, Y, and Z. Show them a little bit more of who you are other than just what they're reading on paper or online. In terms of work history and things of that nature, they need to be the same on your resume and your LinkedIn profile. The titles, the company names, the start and end years, all of that stuff needs to be the same and consistent, just because employers are basically looking at the two to make sure that you're not pulling one over on them. So you have to tell a consistent story on both, but LinkedIn allows you to give a little bit more of that personality. You can have a picture if you want. Pictures, in the US are a big no-no unless you work in showbiz, right? If you work in entertainment, you need a headshot. And that still wouldn't go on your resume. It would be attached to your resume. So there are certain things that you can do on a LinkedIn profile that are not advised on a resume. The activity that you create on your LinkedIn profile in terms of what you post about, what articles you share, what articles you write and publish, all of that can provide a greater depth of information about you as a professional and an individual that you might not be able to fit on a resume. So I think about it that way. What else can you show them about you that would help demonstrate that you're a great fit and you're truly into this type of work and you're thinking about it and that sort of thing that doesn't make sense on your resume? Okay. Abby, how many lines to be included on cover letters? Oh, okay, so things about cover letters in general. A lot of people ask me, do I need one? I always had a stat that I've used, and then I attended a workshop last week by Glassdoor, and one of their recruiters had done an informal poll and had the same stat. So I feel very confident saying that 50% of recruiters and employers will fully admit that they're never going to read your cover letter, and 50% say that they are absolutely required, important, and that they do read them. So always have one, because you don't know who you're dealing with. Unless the application specifically says do not provide a cover letter, you should provide a cover letter, because a cover letter is an opportunity to provide other details that don't make sense in your resume but support your candidacy. It's a great way to very quickly summarize and demonstrate how you possess both the soft and hard skills that they need for the job. So there's a lot there that can be used. In terms of how many lines should be included, I couldn't give you a specific line. What I would say is that you, if it was printed out on a piece of paper that had like the 1-inch margin all around it, it should fit on one page, no problem. No problem. I typically break mine into 3 main sections. An intro paragraph that explains how I learned about the position and what excites me about the company and the job at hand. So a little bit to demonstrate I've done my research on them and to give them a little taste of why I'm excited about this type of opportunity, so they get a little insight into my personality. The middle section is all about demonstrating that I'm qualified for the role. You're looking for these things, here's how I possess those. So basically giving them the cheat sheet or the reference sheet to then read my resume. I'm not regurgitating my resume, but I am basically giving them the cheat sheets or the reference doc so that they then know what they're looking for on my resume to further demonstrate my skill set. And then the closing paragraph is all about getting that call to action. I would love to speak to you about how I could leverage X, Y, and Z skills to provide these types of outcomes, results, benefits, value to you, to your employer, to your client, whatever it is. I'll follow up on X date. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns about my application prior to then. So something along those lines. Oh, can I see a resume framework? Okay, a couple things there, and I know we're running out of time. Resume framework. There were 3 articles that I sent Jenna, and Jenna, I think they're the last 3 in the email I sent you. One is basically, I wrote that's fairly long, that goes into each part of the resume and what you should think about for each of those sections. So that's a really good one to look at. There's so many sections, and Frank, I'd love to go into every part of a resume, but we're short on time. That is an excellent resource. There's another one that my colleague Carson wrote, which is kind of the ultimate guide. It is super, super long. It's super, super detailed, and it goes into each section of the resume, but in even greater detail than I did on my article. So that's definitely one. And it goes into a lot of the different rules to consider as you're crafting your resume. And then I also have an article called 11 Steps to Writing the Perfect Resume. I think it's something like that. That actually is less about how to write the resume, and it's more about what information do you need to gather in order for you or for your professional writer to write the best possible document. So definitely check that one out. Oh, Jenna, thank you so much for finding that article for Nicoletta. I really appreciate it. Oh, Kendall, my older experience is military. Love it. Thank you so much for your service, by the way. Yes, you're definitely going to include that. And I would say, and you would have a subsection that's called military experience. And then again, some of the dates you might be removing dates, but you would want to, similar to having an earlier career experience, you would have a section that's your military experience and put that in there, because I think that is so important. We do have a few articles that are specifically dedicated to helping those who were previously in the military transition to civilian work, that talks about, how you can talk about that older experience. I think most of those articles are geared towards assuming your military experience is within that 15-year window, but I'm sure some of that could also be applied to outside that 15-year window. And I believe there are also resume samples to look at. So that's definitely something to look at. Hey, Numan, you said a link's not working. Can you specify which one you're trying to click on? Because there's a ton of them. Which one are you looking at in particular? And the one great thing I will say is that if you're interested in any of the articles that have been posted in this chat by TopResume, she's giving you a good part of the article title. So if you go to topresume.com and you click on career advice and you go to our blog, if you click on any article and then go use the search bar, you can search by that name, and it will direct you to the appropriate article for sure. So definitely keep that in mind. We are actually out of time. I want to thank everybody who stuck in there and joined me for this live Q&A. I'll do a recap later this week on my tips, but let me know. Oh, good, it's working. Great. But thank you so much for joining me. Again, my name is Amanda Augustine. I am a certified professional career coach and resume writer and the resident career expert for TopResume, as well as our sister sites, Top Interview and Top CV. I look forward to seeing you next week. Next Tuesday, same time, same place. I'm gonna focus on job search strategies and resume tips that are specific to those who have graduated, say 2019 up to this coming graduation. So if that doesn't apply for you, but you know someone who does need that type of guidance, please send them our way so they can, ask their questions. And then the following week, I'll resume doing more of a general audience. Maybe we'll do LinkedIn. I'll try and give you a heads up ahead of time so you know if it makes sense for you to tune in. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone, and stay at it. We got this.